So I was thinking about a childhood memory that I had the other day. It was me, my older brother, and my older sister, and we were in line for Splash Mountain at Disney World. And I must have been in elementary school, maybe 5th grade, and I was so excited because this was the first real roller coaster that I had ever been on. Now, if you're a roller coaster lover like I am, Splash Mountain is kind of a baby ride when it comes to roller coasters, but to my 4th or 5th-year-old mind, it was, that drop at the end was very dramatic. But I remember getting in line, and they had one of those rulers where you had to be so tall in order to get on the ride. And I remember the guy at the front didn't even really care or love his job a whole lot, so he didn't really pay attention, and he kind of just glanced at me, and I had lifted my head up and stretched as tall as I could because I wanted so bad to be tall enough to get on this ride. And anyway, so I stretched up, and he passed me on through. He said, "Okay, you're good." And I remember being so excited. My eyes beamed, and my face lit up like the 4th of July. And I got in line, and I waited for an hour, maybe even an hour and a half, as the excitement never drifted, never left me. I was always that excited to get on the ride. I didn't skip in line, even though opportunity came up where I was able to skip. I wanted to wait my turn. I wanted to see the scenery. I wanted to do what I needed to do to get on this amazing ride. And then there we were the next ones in line to get on, and there was yet another ruler. And I remember doing what I did before that made me tall enough, and I stretched up, and I lifted my chin up in the air, and I stood as tall as I possibly could. But then the guy, however, that was there checking liked his job a little bit more than the other one. He paid a lot more attention, and he noticed something that was different. He said, "Son, can you please get off of your tippy toes?" And I looked down, and sure enough, I was standing on the tips of my toes to clear the standard of how tall I had to be. And I remember the guy saying, "Stand flat-footed," and I did, and he looked at me smiling, as I only could imagine that he was going to tell me to press on, that I was tall enough. And with a smile and a glimmer in his eye, he looked down at me as he said, "Son, you're not tall enough. You can't get on this ride. You need to grow some." And I remember that phrase echoing in my mind, "Son, you need to grow some." As I walked defeated down the exit ramp alone because my brother and sister looked at me and they said, "Michael, I'm sorry. We waited in line for an hour and a half for riding this ride. Mom and Dad are waiting for you at the exit. Just go." And I remember saying, why was I able to get on and get past the first ruler? How come I was tall enough to get in line for the ride, but I wasn't tall enough to get on the ride? And I remember being so frustrated and so upset. God brought this to my attention, and he said, "Michael, you're like this still in a lot of ways." And see, as Christians, we're like this in a lot of ways. We accept Christ into our life, and we get in line. And we're so excited about Jesus that it keeps us staying on the right path at first, but over time, we wait and we wait and we wait for the destiny or the calling that God has for us, and the excitement begins to dwindle as temptation to skip in line, to advance through our own means, to go a different way than the way that God would have us to go, starts to seep in, and opportunity arises for us to skip in line. And some of us take it. Some of us take that opportunity and they say, I've waited long enough. I'm going my own way. And then there's others of us that press on. Because if you get caught skipping in line in Disney World, they kick you out of the park. And so many people have been caught skipping in line in their Christian walk that they haven't been kicked out of the church, but they've felt abandoned and alone, and they've separated themselves from the church. But then there's others of us that have patiently waited in line and did what God has told us to do. We've been reading our Bibles, we've been going to church, we've been doing what God has wanted us to do, but when we get to the next phase in our life and we say, this is it, God's finally going to promote me. This is it. God looks at us and says, you're not ready. You still need to grow some. You're not ready. And like so many of us, those times in my life and in our lives, we're faced with a choice to either say, okay, God, what do I need to let go of? Where do I need to grow so that I can move on to the next phase of my relationship with you? But then there's some of us that say, it's not fair. God, it's not fair. I've been waiting in line for an hour and a half. How come I was able to get in this line if you were going to keep me from getting on the ride? God, how come I was able to be a Christian? How come you told me I had all these destinies, all this destiny and all this purpose in my life, if you were going to keep that destiny and purpose from me? See, I believe God is standing right next to us with tears in his eyes saying, I have all of this destiny, I have all of this purpose, but you can't handle it until you grow up. So in my life, I know that there are areas that I need to let go, that I need to grow up so that I can embrace what God has for me. How about you? After this video is over with, are you just going to let this word pass you by, go in one ear and out the other? Or are you going to take time today to pray and say, God, what area do I need to grow up? Where do I need to grow up? Or better yet, God, what areas, what things do I need to let go of so that I can grab a hold of more of you? Because it's not enough to stay where we're at. God has called all of us, from the youngest to the oldest, whether you just got saved or whether you've been saved for 50, 60 years. God has not called you to stand still. He's called you to grow up. 1 Corinthians 13, Paul writes, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I acted like a child, but when I became a man, I pushed away childish things. I believe that no matter how old you are, there are always childish things that you need to push away from. So what is it? What are you going to push away from today and grow up?